Thanks so much for having me, and I am going to talk to you about a little bit of research I've been doing. Aside from my regular job, this is a little bit of my hobby job, and what we're calling the knot of yes and no. And what I want you to do is kind of participate with me. I want to really take you along on the results. So what I'd like you to think about for a moment is a time recently when you told someone no to a request they made of you, okay? So take a moment. Something should come to mind. Everybody ready? Onward. So 2013, I called the year of no for myself. I was totally overwhelmed professionally and personally, and I knew I needed to find a way to say no to the requests I was getting that were both random and not useful, but I just wasn't making it happen, so that was my New Year's resolution. I created a little rubric where I kept track of the most random requests that usually come via email, and you know those, right? Where they put all the work on you to respond to something. And I was talking to friends, other academics, colleagues, and people in business who are very busy and in demand, and I was saying, what are you guys doing? How are you keeping your priorities aligned and getting things done? And it's exactly what Rachel talked about. What are your personal priorities? What is your personal alignment? And essentially, this is what I was looking for. So I graded myself for about 6 weeks according to how kind was I, how honest was I, how timely was my response. And I was failing miserably across all domains, let me just say. I was not particularly kind at times. I wasn't honest most of the time. I found an excuse. So I really got interested in why is this such a hard little knot in our lives? I know it is for me, and everyone else I talked to said the same thing. I can't say no. I have such a hard time saying no. So I said, I'm really actually going to do some research on this. And one of the things is my background is in education. And so we look at what's called agency. And agency is defined as the ability to exert your desires on the world. Now, this is very, very important because it leads in young children to making friendships, to getting recognition, to engaging other human beings predominantly. But as time goes on, it leads to self-control, motivation. It's linked to a whole array of skills that we really need to be successful in life and to be happy. So when I started thinking about all of the requests I was getting, I couldn't help but think that this was someone else's agency and not my own that was kind of trying to come into my life. And how was I going to manage that? And that really helped frame my thinking as I moved forward. So what did we do? We drafted a survey. I collaborated with a friend at Duke University, and we came up with a survey. The first part of the survey was just what I did with you guys. Think of a recent time when you received an unexpected request that you responded no to. And then it followed with a bunch of questions. Well, let me just say the data was incredibly rich. As soon as we saw it, we knew we had touched a nerve in a lot of people. Is this resonating with you, right? So what we found is this. No is fraught with emotion, and really predominantly negative emotion. So the first thing, guilt. Over 50% of people reported that they felt guilty when they turned down requests, even requests that were not aligned with their own personal goals and vision. That was we were actually quite surprised by that. And in the survey, it was a quantitative survey, but we left one box open, if you want to add something, and you should see the pages of data that I have that people wrote about their situations. So first it was guilt. Now think to yourself, go back to your own thought bubble, okay? Did you feel guilty? The next thing that people feel predominantly when they say no is fear. So we have guilt and fear, right? And I was surprised a little bit by that. The third emotion was anger. So let's take a step back and get back in your thought bubble. Receiving an unsolicited request or something you don't want to do, and we feel these negative emotions, guilt, fear, and anger. Now, there has to be a better way, right? Because we're constantly bombarded with requests for our time, for our resources, for our intelligence, all sorts of things like this. So what was interesting about the anger piece was that what came in right after that were pleasure and relief. And there are those requests that you get that it actually feels good to say no. Yeah, you're laughing. I'll take that as recognition. So then we also looked at how did relationships influence people's ability to say no? And it was pretty intuitive. Friends are very easy to say no to because those are the loosest ties. Family was the most difficult initially. Colleagues fell somewhere in the middle. But the minute you introduce an authority, a sense of authority, so if someone is perceived to have authority over you, it could be a boss, it could be a spouse, that was for the participant to determine. The levels of fear and anger spiked. So there's a real relationship, there's a real relationship between, the authority was difficult, but the bottom line is this is really useful when you're thinking about trying to exert your agency on people. Don't ask your friends for money. They're going to turn you down. Right? I mean, and the money piece probably is best handled with family, but it's a really good way to start to think about how do you get to yes? Because that ultimately is when I kind of named this the knot of yes and no. Figuring out how to say no helps you get to yes, not only with others, but with yourself. So then age. We looked at age. How is this affected over time? And what was interesting is the younger you are, the more the social relationships matter. So the good news for us is that as we get older, we don't give a shit. There's light at the end of the tunnel. So it does, in fact, get better. I'm still waiting for that, of course, but I'm hopeful. The other piece that was interesting was money. So of the participants, 25% responded that they had been asked for money. And people said that they felt fine saying no if people asked them for money. They felt more guilt if they were asked for service or time. But what's interesting when you really think about that is what is the value you place on your time, right? If a friend asked me, or even a family member asked me to help them move, I'd rather write a check. There's just some things, car washing, not happening. There are just some things. And so it was interesting when I was speaking with a collaborator about this, that it's counterintuitive. We feel fine saying no when people ask us for money, but in reality, at times it may be in our best interests to just go ahead and give them the money and save our time for a higher priority. And then again, I mentioned already the issue of authority. There were 3 times the amount of fear and anger when you got asked for something unexpected from someone in a position of authority. People are afraid of reprisal, they're afraid of punishment, they're afraid of damaging relationships. So this we're continuing to unpack a little bit more. But what came out, and I'm going to spend the majority of the rest of my time on this, were the gender differences. So men predicted Yep, don't need to say much more. Men predicted that they would not feel too badly for saying no, and in fact, they didn't feel too badly after the fact. Women anticipated they would in fact feel very badly, and they felt badly, not quite as badly as they anticipated, but they still felt more guilt. The men were actually right on, and we're going to talk about probably some of the reasons why this is. The other thing about women is that they had a harder time saying no to other women. So this was something that we didn't anticipate finding, and is been very interesting. So now we're moving the research to the next stage, which is actually experiments. And I've been doing a bunch of kind of gathering of information. Why might this be? And so I'm just going to posit some ideas about why this might be as we continue to explore, what's going on with no. Women are socialized differently than men. And it begins at a very young age. So I have some of my old grad students who are collecting data for me in schools, and we're starting with children as young as 2. The boys receive no from the teacher almost twice as often as the girls, and the severity of the no, we created a scale to rate it. The severity of the no is much higher. Now this may sound bad, but actually when you think about it, what it provides is an interesting feedback loop that men and boys have access to that women do not. So if we're starting at a very young age and they're getting more practice both hearing and saying no, then naturally it would pan out as adults. They would have an easier time. The other interesting thing is that in 5th grade, across all subject areas, girls outperform boys. But when given a novel or new task, girls tend to give up much more easily when challenged because they haven't necessarily had the practice of going around, of trying different things. I want to think that there's a tie there. The other thing is biology. The female amygdala, unfortunately, is activated by conflict. It's very sensitive to conflict. And then not only is it sensitive to conflict, but it encodes memories of negative emotional experiences. So not only is it flare up more easily, but then you process it for a longer time, and so you get to live with higher degrees of guilt for a longer period of time. Isn't that just grand? So what does this mean for you? Kind of what are the big takeaways here? I think the first thing is give up the guilt. The guilt's not getting you anywhere. I think Rachel hit on some amazing points. I can't be doing the things I want to be doing if I'm doing the things you want me to be doing all the time. There has to be a balance. So giving up the guilt. The other thing is there's something known as an egocentric bias. So when someone asks you for something, it may be that you're number 25 on the list, and you say no, they're going to go to 26. It's really not that big of a deal. I hear someone laughing. It's really not that big of a deal, and it's important to remember that, and that's why I brought up that topic of agency. The idea that if their agency overrides your own, then you're going to be doing, you'll be someone else's assistant for quite some time. The second thing is practice. It really helps. You have to practice. It's not like the Malcolm Gladwell 10,000-hour rule. We're not trying to get that many no's. And the men in the room, I want to say, all the men I talked to about my research says, well, I never met a woman who had trouble saying no. Well, I beg to differ. It might be a personal issue. So I want to encourage everyone to practice. And finally, one of the important things that kind of came out of it is give yourself time to process the emotions. There's any time that you try to make a decision where there's emotional charge, you tend to not make a great decision. So it's always in your best interest to process it and then move on to make a decision. But the research did show that if you wait too long, you'll have a tendency to lie. You're going to tell a lie. So don't wait too long. So I leave you with a challenge today, that you accept my no's at the after party when you all try to offer me drinks, and that you practice. I really want you guys to practice. Your challenge is once a day. Say no to something that you traditionally would not have said no to. Let's have you try that once a day, and then we'll circle back. So thank you so much.